Hey, welcome to Value Matters, your one-stop destination for everything about driving maximum value in the supply chain. My name is Johann, and I'm your host, and I'm here to bring you the insights, the strategies, the success stories from supply chain experts and thought leaders from all around the world. Whether you're a supply chain professional, a business owner, or just someone who's, I would say, passionate about optimizing performance and driving value, you've come to the right place. In this podcast, we'll be exploring the big ideas, the game changing innovations, but also, those tiny little practical tips that can help you create more value and deliver better results than ever. So, welcome on board. Fasten your seatbelts and get ready for a deep dive into the world of value creation in supply chain. It's time to make value matters. So, welcome to the show. Today is a very, very special day for me. This is the very first episode of Value Matters, the podcast series you just luckily came across. My name is Johan Robert, and I was kind of born and raised in supply chain, literally speaking. For the last 16 years or so, I've been collaborating with dozens of companies on their replenishment process optimization. But for the last 5 years, I've been investigating a lot on how those optimization projects effectively translate into business value. How, for example, to turn an investment in forecasting or a change in inventory policy into a monetized uplift in the P&L of a company. And it's not just about evaluating the return on investment of a project. That's important, but there's way more than that. There's more important than that. It's all about designing and conducting a project so that it, by design, maximizes added value. All along this journey, I've come across fantastic experts, practitioners, thought leaders who've definitely helped me better understand the state of the art of the current practices, both their benefits, but also their limits. This podcast is all about sharing what I've learned so far, but also about highlighting the awesome work that's being done by these world-class, inspiring experts. So today I'm excited and proud to welcome someone who has had a huge impact on my journey so far, someone who has helped me, who has supported me in various ways, and someone who has now become a real mentor for me, I would say. So dear audience, let me introduce you for this very first episode to Mike Gilliland. Mike is the former product marketing manager at SAS Software. He has authored a few books, among which the business forecasting deal, which we will be, of course, discussing during this episode. And he is now the chief editor of Foresight, the international journal of applied forecasting, edited by the International Institute of Forecasters. Mike, welcome to the show. Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I guess start a little bit about myself. Is that like?
Yeah. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience then?
Great. First, I come from, I guess, a philosophy background. I received my bachelor's degree in philosophy from Michigan State University, and then a master's in philosophy from Johns Hopkins. Also have a Master of Science in Engineering from Johns Hopkins, basically in applied math. In 2021, I retired from SAS, where I was a marketing manager for SAS forecasting software. And prior to that, I'd spent about 18 years in various forecasting and supply chain and consulting positions in the food, consumer electronics, and apparel industries. And I guess on a personal basis, I currently live on a 36-acre farm in very rural Seagrove, North Carolina, in the U.S. Where we've got 5 dogs, 4 cats, 26 chickens. I enjoy spending much of my time outdoors, renovating the old barns on the property, building trails in the woods, maintaining the property with a tractor. I never thought I'd own a tractor in my life, but I do now. And mainly trying to avoid the snakes and the ticks and being attacked by a very aggressive rooster. So that, in a nutshell, that's my life right now.
I love it. I was pretty sure you were to mention the rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
You've been recently appointed chief editor of Foresight magazine. Could you tell us more about this journal, maybe to introduce it to our audience?
Certainly, yeah. Foresight is one of two journals published by the International Institute of Forecasters. First, their International Journal Forecasting is a very highly regarded research journal that they publish, and then Foresight, which is intended for the practitioner audience. Len Tashman founded Foresight in 2005 and was editor-in-chief until retiring last fall when I took over that role. The approach that Len started and that I'm trying to continue is to maintain a very critical look at the practice of forecasting, not just be like a rah-rah cheerleaders for the forecasting profession, but really spend a lot of time and a lot of effort critically examining the different approaches that are tried and methods developed and so on to make sure we're getting toward the good answers. What we publish, the most useful takeaways from the academic research along with the lessons that have been learned by practitioners. And to go along with this critical approach, we often publish commentaries along with our articles, and those may sometimes extend the ideas that were in the original article or be sort of critical and offering opposing viewpoints. And we think that's very important. To advance our knowledge, I think we advance our knowledge through civil discourse, unlike some of the discourse you find online. So we try to keep it civil in Foresight, airing different perspectives and eventually, hopefully, resolving to the correct answer. So as editor, I try to encourage a broad diversity of viewpoints and opinions and backgrounds and definitely encourage new authors to write for us. We've got a large editorial staff that reviews all the manuscript submissions. Those that are accepted will spend a lot of work with the authors to make sure the points are being expressed both very clearly and very concisely. And we want to be respectful of the time of our audience. A lot of them industry practitioners, they've got jobs, and this is a chance for them, to get those takeaways in a very efficient manner. Other thing I'm very proud of is that Foresight is truly an international journal. In fact, we had authors from 11 different countries in the most recent issue.
Wow, impressive. So for our audience, this journal, of course, is not focused on supply chain, but more generally, it addresses anything that deals with forecasting practices, regardless of their intended use. Yet, really delivers a lot of insights that are really, I would say, valuable for supply chainers. So clearly, I'm highly recommending anyone engaged in forecasting, in supply chain, to subscribe to Foresight, to have a look at it, and also to join the IIF. The IIF is the International Institute of Forecasters that you've joined quite a few years ago, I think, Mike. When did you join the IIF?
Yeah, I joined IIF in 2004, back the time when I first joined SAS. At that time, working in product management for the retail forecasting software they were developing at the time. Now, all of the forecasting R&D people were members of IIF, and they were frequently spoke at the conferences. Their conference, the International Symposium on Forecasting. So I attended my first ISF in 2005. And Johann, I think that was your first in Oxford last year. Was your first ISF?
Yeah, my first last year, 2022 in Oxford.
And I don't know how you felt going, but I was very skeptical the first one I went to, because I figured all these presentations are going to be highly technical, impossible for me to understand, completely divorced from the reality of what we face when we're doing real life business forecasting. That was my concern. But while some of the content, some of the presentations, they did kind of seem a little divorced from or of limited use in real life, I did meet many of the researchers that were keenly focused on the actual application of new forecasting methods and how that they really are working in business. So that was the exciting point for me, getting this whole new realm of people, of new contexts to be able to communicate with and share our thoughts and ideas on the experiences on the real use of these methods in business.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, really applied. And as on the organization itself, the IAF, how would you define it? What's the goal of the IAF?
Yeah. I see it as a community of the top researchers in the forecasting world, as well as many of the leading forecasting practitioners from industry and government and vendors, from software vendors and those in the consulting business. As it says on the forecasters.org website, IAF is a nonprofit organization, and it's dedicated to supporting the generation and distribution of knowledge about forecasting. So there's a lot of initiatives and support for research grants and things like, in addition to the annual International Symposium on Forecasting, which draws over 400 attendees per year, there are things like workshops held throughout the year in different parts of the world. There is a pre-conference summer school that's held every year. There are occasional webinars and lecture series available online. And then there is a Foresight conference aimed at the practitioners. Now, this year, that's going to be held in New York City, November 6th through 7th, in partnership with the University of Nicosia in the Makridakis Open Forecasting Center. It's on the topic of the future of forecasting, thinking about the emerging role of artificial intelligence in forecasting and how we deal with that. And it's also going to be presenting a lot of the results and analysis of the recently competed M6 forecasting competition, and in fact have the award ceremony for the M6. So a lot will be going on there, and I think it's going to be really valuable opportunity for practitioners to come and hear a lot of good speakers and just see where we see the direction is going and how we can take advantage of those advances. IIF also supports initiatives like the Forecasting for Social Good. Now, this was founded by Bachman Rostami Tabar of Cardiff University, and Bachman runs training seminars in developing countries throughout the world. So really good works being done by the organization.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I really love the IAF. There's so much initiative, so much to learn, and so many people to meet. So definitely, I really highly recommend anyone. That's the advertisement part of it. No, really, there's no sponsorship. There's just an honest and genuine recommendation because I'm just in love with the IAF. But it's such a welcoming and supportive community. You can basically discuss and share ideas with anyone, including world-class experts, people we are used to, from who we are used to read the books, and now we are face to face, having lunch together, and just sharing ideas and having them challenging our ideas. It's just a fantastic way to learn. And as you say, it's totally accessible. It's not academics discussing to academics only on very tough topics, but it's really applied to real world issues and our daily lives in supply chain too. That's why I love it. This being said, Mike, there are two main reasons why I wanted to have you with me today for this very first episode. And the first reason is the FVA, the forecast value added. And it's a concept that you helped popularize 2 decades ago, if I'm right. And mostly from this great book, the business forecasting deal. I think it might be one of the first initiative to measure the performance, not of the forecast, but of the process used to create this forecast. I mean, evaluating how the performance of a forecast improve or not, by the way. Sometimes it decrease all along the different steps. How could you briefly explain to our audience what's the concept about, how does it work?
Well, that's a great summary you just gave. And when I think of FVA as a framework or a mindset, it's really a way of thinking about the forecasting problem. Now, we tend to assume that all of our efforts, our fancy models, our elaborate forecasting processes, all these human touch points in a process to make the adjustments, we tend to assume that those are all making the forecast more accurate. But if you step back and take the time to actually measure these different steps in a forecasting process, you often find that the extra effort is not only failing to improve accuracy, but often because of human biases and the political nature of a forecasting process, these efforts may actually just be making the forecast less accurate. So FVA is really taking a scientific approach to the evaluation of forecasting performance. Essentially, you're starting with a null hypothesis. My null hypothesis is that my forecasting process has no effect. That is, it's not making the results any better or any worse than if we did nothing and just used, say, a naive forecast. We just used the last observation as our forecast going into the future. So what's kind of happening here is that the naive forecast serves like a placebo when you're doing a test for a new drug or a new medical treatment. Does the new treatment, does the new drug perform better than doing nothing and taking the sugar pill? That's what you're trying to find out in a scientific evaluation. And that's what really we're trying to do in FVA. Not only are we comparing to this naive forecast, but as you said, Johann, looking at every step in a process, because organizations often have multi-step forecasting process where from the modeling to different layers of review by different layers of management. So it's very important to check all those and see if they're actually contributing to improving the forecast. So ultimately, FVA is about identifying and eliminating waste in a forecasting process. And waste being defined as those process steps and participants that are failing to improve the forecast or may even be making it worse.
Yeah, I love it. This is definitely a lean-like approach, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the promise is get more performance, get more accuracy by doing less, by getting rid of all those steps that maybe takes time and at the end doesn't demonstrate any real value add. And what's really great about it is it does not require any specific tooling or any PhD in statistics or whatsoever. I mean, a spreadsheet and a common sense is just good enough to start with using FVA.
And an analogy maybe to Deming and the introduction of process control methods. That process control methods aren't fancy, for the most part, are not fancy statistical things that need a lot. You don't need to be a PhD in training. You can be a guy on a shop floor with very little education, can gather the data and create the charts and understand if your process is behaving badly. So I'm not suggesting it's anything nearly, at the level of value that process control methods have brought to the world over the years, but it's the same kind of idea, something simple that pretty much anybody can apply.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you came to this idea of measuring this improvement of all along the process? What's the genesis of this mindset framework?
Yeah, my first job out of graduate school after I'd finished essentially the applied math degree was to work as an operations research analyst at a division of Kraft Foods. And at this time, I had no training, no background in forecasting, no experience, nothing at all in forecasting. But I got involved in building the division's first ever forecasting system and defining and overseeing a newly created forecasting process for them. So this was back in 1985. So this was almost 40 years ago. Now, of course, I made every single mistake that you can imagine in defining and building this system and my approach to it. The most fundamental mistake being assuming that what we built was actually going to make the forecast better. But I did have that advantage of I had come from this philosophy of science type background. And so I began comparing things like our model's accuracy to simpler alternatives. And that's something I've been known for years and years. Forecasters have long recognized you should always evaluate your method to a simpler alternative like a naive forecast. That was nothing innovative. But also looking at the judgmental overrides. and how they compared to the statistical forecast. And again, people had recognized it, that there could be problems and judgmental overrides. But while there was no name, I hadn't thought of a name for it at the time. This is really the genesis of this forecast value added framework to evaluate your overall process, and not just assume it's making things better.
Yeah, we tend to be sometimes biased, overconfident about our own initiatives, or sometimes it maybe even too skeptical about other people feedbacks on what we do. And FVA could be used as a way also to kind of demonstrate that what the others are saying is wrong. I mean, if you're very skeptical with what your sales team is sharing as a foresight, as a forecast, you can use the FVA to have the facts and first reassure yourself that it's true, or maybe correct your own view, because they have a lot of insights and they are directly linked to the market, so they know a lot of things. But then you can also use FVA to show where it happens that they are wrong and what happens when they are wrong. So definitely
using data and evidence to draw your conclusions rather than just basing everything on your opinion or gut feel. Yep.
Exactly. And this approach has now become quite popular. I mean, in all the new books about forecasting, FVA is definitely one of the chapter in the book, and it's part of the must-have and the basics of any forecasting process. So that's wonderful. Yet, I've been quite surprised because here in France, for example, I've discovered FVA quite late. So maybe I was badly educated about it at first, but there are very few companies, I think, or too few for sure, companies that know about the FVA approach and how to apply it and what kind of insights they could get from it. From your own experience, you have and maybe an example of a company that use the FVA to effectively expose some problem and improve their practice.
Yeah. Well, sometimes the results of an FVA analysis are pretty embarrassing, where you're showing that you've been wasting a lot of time and money in forecasting. So it's kind of understandable, the reluctance sometimes for people to share some of this information, especially publicly. But my favorite example of this goes all the way back to 2011. This is a consumer goods company in the United States that spoke at a conference. They looked across all their products. They had thousands of products, and overall, on average, a naive forecast achieved an accuracy of 60%. Okay. Then they looked at, their forecasting system generated by their models. What was the accuracy across all their products for that? And that averaged 65%. So they were actually adding 5 percentage points of value through their statistical models. Great. But then they looked at, what is the final forecast after management made adjustments? The final forecast being the number they fed into their planning systems. Okay, the accuracy of that was just 62%. So they had all this management time spent reviewing and changing or updating numbers, only to destroy 3 percentage points of accuracy in the forecast. So to me, that's a great example. I'm glad they came out publicly to share that, because this is the kind of situation that companies may find when they do an FVA, and that's why it's so important to do an FVA, because until you know this is happening, it's not something that's even on your radar to fix, because you don't know it's a problem until you've discovered it.
And regarding this company, do you know if they have changed their process afterwards? If they have decided not to review the forecast anymore, or to review just some specific items?
I was not engaged. They weren't a customer of ours, and so I wasn't engaged directly with them in a consulting engagement or any way. So I don't know all the details of what they were able to do internally on that, other than doing. They also one thing they did, some innovations in terms of developing new kinds of reporting to help isolate where the more problematic items were, versus the ones they were doing well versus the ones, and try to identify the characteristics of items that they had problems with. Another company, though, it comes to mind that did something was the gentleman running forecasting, or realizing that they were asking the salespeople to provide input in the forecasting process.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds like a good idea. It sounds because salespeople, should be close to the customer, should know what's
Yeah.
going on. But unfortunately, salespeople are also in a highly political sort of a biased situation where you can't necessarily trust what they're going to say. And they may not be the most statistically savvy people who are really good at forecasting to begin with. So what he did was to improve the overall process and not waste a lot of time with the salespeople was just say, hey, I'm going to give you the statistical forecast. This is what we think. Only make a change to it if you have very good reason
Mm-hmm.
to make a change. Because otherwise, we're just going to go with this. And all the evidence shows most of the time when you're making a change, you're just making it worse. So don't help me unless you've got really good information to help me. So that way he was able to ultimately get better results while presumably having less effort from the salespeople. They could be out building relationships with the customers. I say I'd rather have my salespeople out playing golf and being friends and building relationships and making sales than behind a computer generating numbers that are just going to make things worse.
Yeah, for sure, definitely, and it makes me think that definitely in this series of podcasts we will be discussing judgmental forecasting, and there's so much to share about that, and when they're effective and when they're not, and what are their benefits and the limits as well. Could we just talk about the name FVA, forecast value added? There's the word value in there, and for me, I definitely understand the meaning of it. I mean, improvement of accuracy is adding value, but there's nothing like real business value in there. Why not naming it forecast accuracy added at first, or would it be clearer for anyone?
I I started using the forecast value added terminology in a supply chain management review article in 2002. So I think that was the first ever use of that term. But you are absolutely correct. It's confusing in the sense that value, we most often are talking about improvement in accuracy added to the forecast. It's not talking at all about the ultimate financial or business
Yeah.
value of that improvement. So FAA probably would have been a better name, although strictly speaking, you can do FVA analysis on something like forecast bias. So,
Yeah.
not just accuracy. So in which case, if you're dealing with bias, your value added would be a reduction in the bias in the forecast. So,
No, I was
we're
just
kind of
kidding.
stuck
I
with
mean,
FVA, but you make a very good point.
I think that FVA is definitely a great name because from a marketing point of view, it definitely is more attractive than forecast accuracy added or forecast bias added or whatever, or bias removed or whatsoever. By the way, I was just thinking that you're definitely right. The FVA mindset is so far kind of exclusively applied to forecasting and to accuracy metrics, but there's no specific reason for this. There's no limitation to the kind of application we could make of it. It could be applied even to different type of metrics. You discussed about the bias, but it could be also for probabilistic metrics. It could be done with, I think, a lot of different metrics, and even any kind of process is not that attached or linked to forecast as well. So I think this concept is definitely used in one way or another in other different industries, but I have very few information about that. Maybe that would be a great question for the audience, for the people who are listening to us today. If you have ever heard of any similar approach applied to different industries, different fields, really feel free to comment on the podcast, or just basically connect with me or with Mike on LinkedIn. And definitely, I would love to hear more about similar initiatives in different industries. Anyway,
well, just one
yeah,
example, Stefan de Koch
yeah,
has extended the concept to the probabilistic forecast. He's created a metric called stochastic value added. There's an article about that in an earlier issue of Foresight. So that's one example of, you mentioned applying it to probabilistic forecast. Not these FVA, that as I originally have always worked with, it was just point forecast.
Yeah. Okay. But definitely, it's way larger than forecast and
Yeah.
accuracy, and it's an approach that could make sense in a lot of different use. Anyway, for anyone who's not yet very familiar with the FVA framework, I definitely recommend Googling it. There are some fantastic resources online about it, but also definitely reading this great book. By the way, Mike, how many copies of it have you sold so far? Because it's it was first published in 2010, right? Or
2010, yeah. It's sold about 5,000 copies,
wow.
and I make like $1 in royalties per copy. So thank you, everyone. But I just want to give some advice to budding authors out there that is that if you're going to write a book about vampires or boy wizards or just about anything other than forecasting if your goal is to make money.
$5,000, you can buy a new tractors,
Eh,
a new
well,
tractor for your farm. Then,
eh,
no, a small one,
not a new tractor, but
a
maybe
used
a
one,
part for a tractor. Yeah.
a part for it. Okay. No, anyway, 5,000 still is quite impressive. It means that it's already had quite a massive impact on the forecasting practices so far. So, congratulations for that.
Thanks.
The second reason why I wanted to have you on the show today is related to the not the ladders, but the previous one, the Foresight magazine issue that was issued last January.
Yes.
So as you said, you recently succeeded to Len Tashman as a chief editor of the magazine. Len was the founder of the magazine, and he has served there as for 17 years. And the very first issue that is published under your own supervision is a special edition. And it's a special edition because it includes a special feature where you asked experts, academics, practitioners to develop ideas and to share their experience on a, a rather provocative question. Does accuracy even matter? That's a really provocative question for in a forecasting community. What made you decide that this question was worth being discussed, and even more than just one article, sorry, but in an entire special feature?
Um, you're right. It's my first issue. So our special feature, does forecast accuracy even matter? The topic was actually inspired by your work demonstrating that the better accuracy doesn't guarantee monetary benefits. And we ultimately made your article the lead in that section, as you know. So again, thank you in advance. We had corresponded. I'd seen some of your work, your commentary on LinkedIn, had reached out to you. You submitted a manuscript to me, and we circulated it among. Well, as you know, this was a really long editorial process for your article. I think it was about 6 months, which is highly unusual for forecast. Normally, for Foresight, normally within a month, we've got the manuscript, we've gone through revisions and edits and so on, and we're ready to go.
The
But
manuscript was really poor, That's why.
well, no, it was not that. It had, a lot of really interesting ideas in there. And so it went to several different editors on the Foresight staff, as you know. So you were getting feedback like every couple of weeks from somebody different about changes or clarifications or additions or subtractions, whatever. So it just seemed like, and then going with the general, approach, or the really, to me, the theme of Foresight of being critical and asking the tough questions, it made sense to build a special issue around this idea. Are we doing the wrong problem after all? Does accuracy even matter? So, I was trained in philosophy. So philosophy tells you to always be questioning everything you believe, everything you do, every assumption you make, every dogma that exists out there. And modern day forecasting has gone back at least 60 years since, I would say, Robert G. Brown's invention or introduction of exponential smoothing. And yet, over those 60 years, there really hasn't been a whole lot of questioning of whether improving accuracy is the right problem to be working on. I assume it is. It probably is. But if we really step back to analyze that. Now, everybody, I think it's well recognized, a better forecast by itself doesn't do anything. It doesn't mean anything unless you've used it to make a better decision, take a better action. doing something that improves the actual performance of the organization. That's your ultimate goal, organizational performance improvement. But then through your article and through 6 additional articles we were able to solicit on that, where we were able to find many situations where improving accuracy actually does not matter. And that perhaps singularly focusing on forecast accuracy may blind the organization to other considerations that may have more impact on overall accuracy. A couple of examples in addition to your article, Stefan Colasso brought in examples from retail. For example, in retail, when you're replenishing a store, it's often you can't just order one item, you order in a case size. There may be 12 or 24 pack that you've got to order in. So in a situation like that, your forecast can actually be a little better or a little worse, but it's not going to change the replenishment decision. You still have to order in that fixed case size. So again, accuracy doesn't really matter that much in that situation. A paper by Theodoro and Spiliotis, they found in doing simulation on M5 data that actually optimizing inventory policy may have a more impactful on improved performance than simply minor improvements in forecast accuracy. So these were the kind of questions we wanted to bring up and stimulate. And again, thank you for kind of getting me thinking about this topic first and helping initiate the special issue.
And thank you for challenging the ideas and for all the other people who have reviewed it and contributed and also disagree sometimes with some thoughts. It's definitely very interesting, but that's a key question, because as you said, if accuracy is not the goal, then we are not going in the right direction, and it's definitely not what we are wanted to do. And it's a topic that I've been investigating for 1 or 2 years so far only, and I'm still in the process of learning about it. And definitely it's not the link between a forecast and its effective value from a business perspective. It is definitely not a straightforward link or an easy link. And what kind of feedbacks did you get from this rather provocative special feature? How did the forecasting community react?
Well, we haven't yet seen any earth-changing impacts like companies haven't all suddenly stop doing forecasting. So no, we haven't quite seen that yet. But I was happy that 3 additional authors thought enough to write additional commentaries for this most recent issue. So they wanted to continue the discussion on this topic. So we know that the feature has generated new thinking, and I'm hoping we'll continue to see more discussion on the topic, for example, at future events like at the ISF, online and discussion groups and LinkedIn and so on, and also in print. So again, thanks. We got this discussion initiated, and we'll see where it takes us.
Okay, great. And if from your own, because you've also a long track of experience, if you were to evaluate the quality of a forecast from a business perspective, how would you do that? What's your thoughts about tackling this issue?
Yeah, well, ultimately, the best accuracy that you can achieve in forecasting is going to be limited by the nature of what you're trying to forecast. Now, simplest example, trying to forecast heads or tails in the toss of a fair coin. Well, over a large number of trials, 50% accuracy is all you're going to achieve. That's the nature. But this limit of accuracy also occurs in business working as well. Say when you're forecasting demand for a product. Now we don't know precisely what that best level of accuracy is, but we do know things like if it's a very simple and smooth and stable demand, we're going to be able to forecast that one more accurately than something that's got highly, a promoted product that's got highly volatile and erratic demand. But so under the FVA mindset, we're not thinking about quality so much in terms of the ultimate accuracy, because accuracy is kind of determined by the nature of what you're trying to forecast. But FVA, where the quality is really determined by I think of it, the quality as of the process of getting there. For me, the objective of forecasting is generate forecasts as accurate and unbiased as we can reasonably expect them to be, given the nature of what we're trying to forecast, and to do this as efficiently as possible. Now, I hate waste. I hate process waste. I hate time and effort and cost and anything that isn't doing anything that isn't making things better. So in forecasting, I like to focus on that efficiency of that overall process, using as few resources as possible to get the results that we achieve. Now, I suppose if forecast accuracy truly what doesn't matter, then we shouldn't be bothering with any of this. But accuracy does matter, at least to some extent, because I see no reason to prefer a less accurate forecast to a more accurate forecast. So to me, I guess I define quality as a forecast is one that's as accurate as you can reasonably expect that we've achieved with the least amount of cost and effort. Going to heroic efforts to try to squeeze out that every last percentage point or fraction of a percent of accuracy has never seemed to me like a very good idea, because small, tiny improvements in accuracy, they're not going to change any decision or action that anybody makes. So they're just a waste of time.
Yeah, that's a pragmatic point of view on that. And definitely, don't take me wrong, I'm not an anti-accuracy guy. I'm definitely believe that there's a lot of value in accuracy, and an accurate forecast is better than a non-accurate forecast. There are just some limitations, and we just can't assume that the link is straightforward, and 1% in accuracy, in improvement of accuracy, would lead that specific amount of business outcomes at the end. It's way more complex than that, at least in supply chain. And yes, Mike, maybe a last question on this topic. So far, most experts in forecasting, most forecasters, focus exclusively on their forecasts. They basically discard the way the forecast is going to be used, the kind of decisions that will be made based on those forecasts, and even more the outcomes of the forecast on the company. Do you think that the role of a forecaster should be restricted, limited to generating the best possible forecast, let's say the most accurate one, or should they kind of embrace a little bit larger the whole decision process, have a better understanding, maybe not just of the time horizon or the level at which the forecast is required. This is definitely important, but I hope that in most companies it's already a must-have. But should they also be more engaged in the decision process, maybe by providing additional insights, or maybe sometimes even tuning the forecast so that it leads to less risky decision, I would say.
Wow.
That's a tough question.
And there's been some discussion of this recently. I don't know if I've come to a definitive answer, my own answer, comfort level of where that should be. Certainly, at a minimum, the forecaster needs to know the basic needs of the user, what they're going to, what level of granularity the forecast is going to be at, and so on. So they produce appropriate forecasts. I think it's always good for them to be engaged with the decision makers or the users of the forecast, both to help, explain, build credibility in what they've done, that this is really the best number that can be come up with. There's value in that the number's trusted and not just wildly overridden, which can often happen in an organization. Often a forecaster produces a forecast that is not what management wants to see. Yeah. Particularly if they see a downtrend in the number, or that we're not going to meet the budget or target. And it's important in that situation that the organization can do really two things. They can either just ignore the forecast completely and continue running with the number, putting a number that they want to see, or if they trust the forecaster and see that this downturn, say, is truly happening, at least gives them time to react and maybe do something to address that, to minimize their risk. They could, for example, maybe start promoting a product to get the volume back up where they want it to be. Maybe they can slow down a production line so they're not building excess inventory on it. So a good relationship between a forecaster and I guess the general business people involved in it. I don't see how that's a bad thing at all.
No.
But I guess I think there's more to the issue, and I'm not sure I've yet got that all figured out in my head.
Yeah, no, nor do I. Definitely. That could be a great special feature for a
Could
coming
be 2024. Yeah, we got
for
4 issues to fill
2024.
out.
Should we decide or not? Because, for example, in the example you shared about Stefan Colassa's article in retail, knowing that the decision will have to account for pack sizes, for example. Um, if the pack size is 100 units, you know that reducing the errors to from one unit won't change the whole world, and it might not worth it by the way. So that kind of feedbacks they could get if they are more aware of the way the forecast is being used. It could help them maybe stop forecasting at one stage because it's fair enough for the intended use of forecast, for example. But it's definitely an open discussion, and wow, I can't believe it, but I think time's already up, Mike. We could have been discussing these topics for hours, and maybe we should have, by the way. But maybe I will have to invite you in another episode if so. Anyway, for those who are interested in this topic, the Foresight magazine is available online. So the entire issue 68, which is the issue that include the special feature, does the forecast accuracy even matter, is available through the IAF website, forecasters.org, but also for this specific special feature, dear audience, I'm happy to share that I've been granted the right to share it with you for free. So if you're interested in giving it a read, again, just ping me on LinkedIn and I'll be more than pleased to send it right down to your inbox. Mike, maybe just a final question before we conclude this episode. As we said earlier, this podcast is all about exploring and challenging the link existing between optimization initiatives, I would say, and their actual impact on the business. Do you have any recommendations? I mean, it could be books, papers, or authors that might be worth discussing or interviewing in this series of podcasts.
Sure. This link between the business value and the accuracy, that's kind of a new and emerging topic. So there's not a whole lot other than what we've done written on that specific issue yet. But some of the authors who I really like, who I think, take a critical view of the whole process and offer some alternative ideas. Guys like Steve Morledge.
Yeah.
Based in the UK. I met Steve at an ISF conference many years ago and become great friends with him. I love his work, his books. He writes for Foresight fairly often. So he's one guy I would definitely recommend following. Another book I really liked that's now a new revision is coming out by Stefan Kolassa and Eno Simpson. Demand forecasting for managers that came out, I think, 2014 or something like that. It's now being revised. Bachman Rasami Tabar, who I mentioned earlier, on the forecasting for social good, he's been added as a co-author, and so they're coming out this year with an expanded edition of the book, which will be great. Another new book dealing with that'll be coming out, I think, later this year, a compilation edited Mohsen Hamouda in based in Paris, I think Mohsen still is. He was a former president of the IAF, Evangelos Spiliotis and Spiros Makrodakis, editors of a new compilation of books, many of them dealing with this role of AI, emergence of AI, and in other, really where we're going in forecasting are some new things, authors that I really like, and ideas I think are everyone worth following. So plus, tons of classic books out there. But these are just some of my favorites.
I would add those books to my pile of books and definitely try to have a review of them in this series of podcasts and add Steve Morledge. I also had the pleasure to meet him at the ISF last year, and it could definitely be a great fit as well. So thank you for for sharing those names. I have the names right now, so they are kind of obliged to. Mike, again, thank you so much. It's really been fantastic to have you with this very first special episode of this podcast, Value Matters. I think you've set the best possible foundations for it. So thank you very much for that, and I look forward to see you in Charlottesville, Virginia, next June for the coming ISF.
Just a few weeks, Johann. Thanks very much. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, Mike.
So
Thank
long.
you. And here we are. This is the very first episode of Value Matters. Dear audience, you might have been watching this episode from YouTube, or maybe you have been listening to it on your favorite podcast platform. Anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and you find value in there. If you liked it, please subscribe to this podcast to ensure that you'll not be missing our next episode. Also, this podcast is yours. I mean, feel free to connect with me. And again, LinkedIn is the best place to do so. And share your ideas or mention someone you think you might be of interest, someone who could be a great guest, a good fit for this podcast. Anyway, it's now time for you and for me to go back to our supply chain duties. But don't forget, when it comes to improving and optimizing activities, more than anything else, value matters.